Alrighty, okay, so I'm just doing a test of a couple of systems here. I've got a high dynamic range game up on the screen, be it Hogwarts Legacy. A very hard game to render, as it turns out. I didn't realise this, but when I got it, I just wanted to run the game at full settings, cranked everything to ultra, and the game was a bit of a slideshow during a few moments. So like many gamers, I learnt to tune the settings down, and I was quite happy to run with them that way for quite a while. The last week or two there's been a driver change up where a new feature has turned up in the beta testing branches, one that I've been looking forward to for quite a while because it was going to offer older video cards like this one. They're probably 4 years old now in the market, and it legitimately doubles my frame rate, 100%. It's called Fluid Motion Frames 2, and it's a game changer. Now, I've used Fluid Motion Frames technologies previously. When Fluid Motion Frames 1 came out, for example, I was like, oh, this is the magic bullet. This is what I need, and I didn't really find that when using it. For much of the gaming I was doing, I was having to use a mouse so that when I clicked a button, things responded instantly. And when using a mouse, I could get away with 30 frames a second gaming brute force. There was just no latency. When I moved, the camera would turn instantaneous. I just found the wireless controllers, because they added a little bit of latency, at 30 frames a second, I found them just a bit unusable. Not in the same way that some games play well on consoles at 30 frames a second. But I certainly found with The Witcher, with all the ray tracing cranked and all settings set to ultra, and Hogwarts Legacy, both those games just played better on a mouse locked at 30 frames. So to be able to play these games for the last year or so, last couple of years, arguably I've been stuck playing at 30 frames a second, and to now be able to play them at a good solid 60 is amazing. But Fluid Motion Frames, the first one, kind of promised that, and it didn't deliver on it. It didn't use, I think it's vector interpretation. This one, Fluid Motion Frames 2, can be handed information by the game title, so it is game dependent a little bit. I've found a couple of software titles that don't do it flawlessly. But if the software is mildly aware of FSR technologies and can actually hand to the display driver some predictive information, such that the fluid motion frame that is generated using predictive information is able to render the vectors in the direction that things on the screen are moving. But the upshot is I can get a frame gen of less than 16 milliseconds, which at 60 frames a second is 16 milliseconds to render to the screen. Pretty confident if you've got the anti-lag on, it'll throw the next frame it's got ready to the screen. It'll dump a frame if need be to keep responsiveness absolutely where it should be. So those technologies combined, The Witcher and Hogwarts now being able to game on a hand controller, for me that's just so awesome. Like, it really makes a difference to the playability of these games. So, for example, and what I'll do is I'll just turn my metrics on. Okay, so this should allow. Okay, so we can see there I've cranked my video card speed up by about 40 megahertz. It takes my power consumption up by about 40 watts. Runs my hotspot a little bit hotter. It makes my fans run a little bit hotter. But for the proofing of a video like this, where we just want to see fluid motion frames and a game that is very hard to rendering really well. So what I'll do is I'll just chuck a broom on and fly down this path. And so at the ends of each of these corners are, I'm trying to think of the Formula 1 term for a dog leg. No, hairpin turn, sorry. Some hairpins. And so doing the hairpins when you're doing frame doubling. And so there with my 1% lows down at 20, I don't know what's going on there, something must be loading in the background. Generally I aim for the 1% low at 60 frames a second. If I do that, the frame rate is very, very smooth. It's hard to trip it up. And certainly running around Hogsmeade, where I used to be limited at about 1400 resolution, with none of the dynamic resolution scaling nonsense on, It just affected the overall picture quality, but with a full brute force render of north of 1600 lines resolution, things like that bird cage on the left of the screen there doesn't turn up very well on any of the scaling technologies. So now being able to play it at 1600 plus resolution, all settings basically maxed out, you know, got the ray tracing on. This game here, where I used to always have frame rates of like 24 to 26 frame lows when running through the courtyard, it would get a little bit janky. That was at low resolution. Now to be able to play the game at much higher resolution and enjoy it on a wireless controller, because the latency between when I try to tell it what direction I want to go and it responding is just so much quicker. So being able to run at 60 frames a second, being able to turn my V6 on, get rid of arguably screen tearing if I so wish. But yeah, areas like this, where it used to get a bit janky through the courtyard here, and it would affect the turn speed. So sorry to make the camera go left and right. I'm doing it on purpose, I don't usually do that. So that's the turn speed basically being unaffected. So in terms of responsiveness and playing, there might be moments where the frame rate looks like it gets a little bit less than smooth, but the machine really to itself feels like it's still brute forcing high frame rate, and the responsiveness of the controller when I'm turning is still where it should be. It's actually a really nice experience to play, even now with the frame rate, the 1% lows dropping for that brief moment. It's all very nice. So it's a bit of a game changer. Fluid Motion Frames 2, if you, the 6700 XT and up, any of the cards which have that extra little bit of RAM on them, which ups the bandwidth, that RAM is I think very usable for the Fluid Motion Frames 2 technology, and essentially the compute shaders that are running the tech. So it might benefit in some games to turn the ray tracing down a notch. And I mean, you can run at 1440 res, and that RAM has that as a third level cache has like a much higher hit rate if you run at low resolution. As you get higher and higher in resolution, the necessary data may not be in that third level RAM on your video card. So it's all about finding the right balance on your particular machine. But for me, I can now render at much higher resolution. The frame rates feel ridiculously higher, and being able to play things like Ghostwire Tokyo in 4K with everything cranked to ultra is just a joy. It's an absolute bliss. So I've found in none of the upscaling modes have I been able to get the grass on the hill in front of me here rendering correctly. So look, at the moment my 1% lows are a little bit, I don't know, less than usual. I must admit I'm running a 10-year-old CPU. Normally I overclock it fairly decently. At the moment I just went into the motherboard BIOS and just said, oh yeah, just auto overclock and let the Asus motherboard do its deal, and it's probably the lowest overclock I've ever run. You know, it's not running my RAM anywhere near it should be, and an i7 from the year 2014 is can be a bit of a holdback. So I mean, the video card's only about 4 years old, that gives it an advantage. But yeah, the RDNA 2 series, or the 6000 series by AMD, now with this Fluid Motion Frames 2, is a bit of a game changer. For any of the games that you're trying to figure out how to max it and what settings you wish to use, I've found that now for my titles that have ray tracing, and the ones that I had to brute force at basically 30, if I wanted the 4K and the high res, I would have to, you have to give something up. If your card isn't the most expensive one on the planet, you want to run the latest games, ultra details. So I don't feel I'm now giving anything up. I'm running my resolution maybe a drop down from the highest in 1 or 2 titles if I want my 1% lows to be absolutely above 60 all the time. Any frame doubling we see on the screen might be exacerbated by my recording settings. I really should record at double the frame rate to isolate each frame individually, so that when I'm doing pans like this, that graying around my character, which only happens when my 99th percentile gets down below 60, I seem to notice. But you don't notice it if it stays up high, and in gameplay you generally don't notice it at all. So look, is the frame gen worth doing on a first-person competitive shooter? Maybe not, just lower your settings down a notch, lower your shadows or something. But on a game like this where you can actually run everything at ultra and thoroughly enjoy it, it's a bit of a game changer. I am really enjoying it. So Fluid Motion Frames is an advantage that's now going to come. That for me, the upshot, and the reason I do this video, getting what feels like 50% more performance, when you typically get about 20% performance increase with any card upgrade, I'd resolved playing this game with all the ray tracing on at high resolution, at middle resolution. I'd resolved to playing it at 30 frames a second because the frame rate variance between areas of the game where it would run at 60 and then drop down to 30, that was distracting. But now to be able to play it with such a rigid frame rate window and being able to up the resolution massively, which really helps the ray tracing resolve meaningfully to the screen, the improvements in visual fidelity is massive. Getting that frame gen lag down at less than 16 milliseconds, I just don't feel like I've added anything to it. And the predictive nature of the frame rate generation just drops the visual errors massively. And apart from that, running the game at twice the frame rate, for all the times when the ray tracing is, when you first enter a room and that first frame is generated where everything's a white wash, and it's a visual noise, it's an error in the frame gen, in the game composition that shouldn't exist, but at 30 frames a second, the persistent on the screen is twice as long as it is at 60. And so dropping all those little visual glitches in the game, whatever visual issues that are introduced with the frame gen in Fluid Motion Frames 2, which uses intelligent predictive motion vectoring, there's so few frame rate errors, and over the course of playing for an hour in a game like this with a third-person camera, I just don't notice them. And so it is a massive game changer with what I would say is no real downside. So is a game changer, is something to look forward to. It's in the beta branches, it's on its way. The benefit to the 6000 series of cards is substantial. The 7000 series cards did a predictive frame in the build of the RDNA 3 over the RDNA 2. They're actually going to just punch 50% higher frame rate naturally due to the card architecture, and they might not get as much of a benefit from the frame generation, just due to so much of the card isn't sitting around doing nothing as the 6000 series cards are, because they might not be loaded up in the compute units as much. The card might not be utilising all of its hardware in the same way that the 7000 series does. So we might notice that ultimately, as a technology, it does benefit the 6000 series cards with that extra RAM on them, I think it's the 6700 and onwards. And if you've got an XT variant and you just want to run your ray tracing one step down from Ultra, you might find you've got that headroom to really punch out what I would say is, lock 60 and really feeling high frame rate gaming or higher. The frame generation is definitely better once you get up to that 60 to 80 frame rate. It just gets better and better. But I found with a lot of titles, so long as I could brute force 30 frames a second in my 1% low, right? Didn't matter what my high frame rate was, just so long as my lows never dropped below 30, Fluid Motion Frames 2 is just feeling like a perfect gaming experience. Anyway, I hope this video finds you in a way that's meaningful, and that this information might be useful to you, and something to look forward to. As I say, for me it feels like getting a new video card like 5 years. If you update every 2.5 years, I feel like my card has just come forward 5 years in age. It's like I've gone out to the shops and spent a serious wad of money again this week, and all the performance of my games is now mirroring what feels like going to the shop and blowing a lot of money. So as continual updates and upgrades go, the latest drivers, certainly in the beta branch, but coming to market shortly, Fluid Motion Frames 2 is a real for the win for gamers everywhere. Alrighty, you have a great day. Be well.